So welcome to the first lesson for early traction. In this session, we'll discuss how to use early traction tactics to find product market fit, then plan how we're going to operationalize and scale those efforts for later growth. So to kick off, the biggest question of all is, what is product market fit? Everyone has a little bit of a different definition. For our purposes, we're going to define product market fit as when we have a gut feeling there is some clear demand for our product. From this demand, we're able to learn about the user, their behaviors, and further understand the value proposition and what they respond to. This is different than explosive product market fit, which may be the case, but it's not required. It also largely depends on the type of business you have too. If this is a new product or service, there's really no way to have explosive demand immediately. You have to generate it first. If this is a product or service that's meeting demand in a crowded space where there's already competitors, then it may be possible to displace that demand and capture it yourself, leading to more explosive product market fit. But regardless, the goal of this is really to understand the value we're providing to our users so we can do more of that. So I wrote you a manual. There are many disjointed parts in this process, and I felt it would make sense to break the path down into 10 different lessons. They're all listed here on the right, and we're going to walk through each session now at a high level. I'll be flipping my screen between the presentation and the manual to make sure everything's clear. Okay, let's get started. The first part of this is to understand your goals. What is the purpose of traction? Gabriel Weinberg talks about this in his intro video to the book Traction when he's talking about the bullseye framework. So, do you want to raise money? Do you want to get cash flow positive? Are you just trying to prove that this is a viable business? Here's the manual. We have a whole section here specifically around understanding your goals, asking those same questions. And I've created a goal setting doc for you to go through with you and your team or yourself to try and figure this out. When you're done with that, come in and share your goals and the reasoning behind them with everybody in the Facebook group. The second step is to identify your value prop. This is a really important step because if you don't, nobody's going to understand what you do. I always say it's very hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. That statement pertains specifically to this. This is so important actually that Amazon, before they release any type of a product, they force their product managers to actually write an internal press release that goes through all the different steps so that they can clearly articulate it. So in the manual, the exercise here is to actually write this press release. Now, I've boiled the entire Amazon press release model down into this exercise, so you can follow this. Now, when you're done with this, please share the sound bites that you come up with everybody in the Facebook group to get their feedback. Now, once you have your value proposition, chances are it's not actually in the voice of the customer. So the third step is to actually translate this into the voice of the customer. In order to do this, you want to ask yourself some questions like, what is their real desired outcome and why do they care about that outcome? What are their questions related to getting that outcome? And that's how you're going to come up with new sound bites. Identify their real needs and identify where they're hanging out. In the manual, step number 3 is to translate this value prop to the customer. The way to do that is to work through these questions in this doc. So the first step here is if you already have customers, you want to ask them these questions. You can use survey.io to do this instantly. If you don't, you want to come up with a hypothesis and try and think through this from the perspective of your customer. Why specifically are they using there? What is their motivation? Also, can you assess the size of the audience? Can you use the Google Keyword Planner or similar web to try and figure out where these people are hanging out online, what they're searching for? And can you identify characteristics and use Facebook Audience Insights to try and build a target audience to assess this? The very last step here, which is very important, is to do a gut check. You really want to make sure that you're solving people's number 1 problem and you're not solving their number 2 or number 3 or 4, etc. Because the difference between the number 1 problem and the number 2 problem is usually dramatic, and there's no urgency if you're solving their number 2 problem. So if you are solving somebody's number 2 problem, think about how this could be translated and positioned in a way where it's actually their number 1 problem. The fourth step is to hunt for your first users. This is all about doing things that don't scale. This is a blitzkrieg approach, hand-to-hand combat. It's a complete hustle. The goal is just to get users so that you can get feedback. In the manual, this step 4, we talk about doing things that don't scale from Paul Graham's essay. We also have a great deck from Zach Onisko, VP of Growth at Hired, on 20 non-scalable ways to hustle to scalable growth. These are all tactics you can use to try and go out and find your first customers. And if you already have your first customers, these are tactics you can use to try and identify new channels and find more customers there. This is an example of some of them right here. Facebook groups came up in the Facebook group that we're talking about the other day. That's a great tactic that you guys could all employ this week to try and get more users. But whatever you do, the real exercise here is just to come back to the Facebook group and let people know what you did that worked, what you did that didn't work. If you're having a hard time figuring out specifically where to look, Check out Brian Balfour's 5-step process to choose your customer acquisition channels. The next step is to optimize your product. So once you have users and you have feedback, you can learn the behavior and adapt. Where are people falling off? How do customers describe the value now? So our exercise in step number 5 is to learn more about how people are using and sharing the product. So you want to segment your users by asking these questions. Rand Fishkin has a really great guide to figure out what makes a qualified person buy and return or share. There's also great ways to do user testing. I've put some cheat sheets in here from usertesting.com. Now, once you've gone through all of this, think about how to improve the experience or the journey that the customers are going through. What experiments can you do to drive more retention to make sure they're coming back? And if you like, please share your findings with everybody in the Facebook group so we can have a conversation around that. Now that you have people using your product and you have some retention, it's time to actually test for product market fit. Now you want to survey your users. What happens if you no longer existed? How upset would they be? And are users able to explain your value prop? This is where the survey.io survey comes into place. So step number 6 here is to actually go build that survey.io link, and then when you come up with your score, share it with everybody in the Facebook group. The 7th step is to build a viral loop in order to get people to share more. In order to do this, we have to answer some questions. What is the incentive? Where are they prompted in my product? And what is the loop model? For every customer that I ask to share, how many people are actually going to share? How many new people are actually going to come in as a result of those shares? So the exercise for step 7 is to answer these questions. Now that we have some form of retention and referral down, we want to identify new key acquisition channels. In order to do this, we're going to run the bullseye framework. We'll brainstorm new channels that we could go after, and we'll find 1 to 2 that you want to exploit. There's an entire video by Jeff Goldenberg on this specific section, but also in the manual, we have specific instructions as to how to run the bullseye framework so that you can find your middle circle, inner circle, and what they refer to as their bullseye, of course, which is the one channel that you should exploit and try to saturate as soon as possible. Once we've found those channels, step number 9 is to double down. Now we want to optimize the top channel or the top 2 channels. We want to saturate it as fast as possible, get a better ROI, and become an expert. So in order to do this, in the manual, our exercise is to figure out better unit economics. Can you improve? Can you optimize there? There's 2 different ways to do this. You can use your cost to acquire customer and your lifetime value, or you can use a staggered approach. And what are the new trends in this channel? Set up Google alerts related to this. Join Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Find industry leaders and subscribe to their blogs. Basically, you want to become an expert. And the last step here is to think about how we're going to operationalize growth. What's working well that we can automate? What are we doing that's taking up too much of our time that we can outsource? So step number 10 is literally to do just that. Document your learnings, figure out some of the things that you can automate, and figure out some of the things that you can outsource. And all in summary, here's a list again, and we'll work through each one of these steps throughout all of the discussions this week.